Yeah. Operation Rapper Inquisition.
Still here.
Operation Rapper Inquisition.
All the gods and goddesses.
Iron Sheet.
Hip hop lives, yo.
The deaf won't hear and the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali. Inept, indirectly, Boo Ali, one of the names of the prophets internationally. Drew said Moors proclaim your nationality, cause you're not Ethiopian or NBC. So he founded America's MST in 28. Me saying that they will cause debates. Debates are needed to clear up the mess, but most debate so they can big up their chest to prove what they know and what they can do. Recreating the wheel that was created by Drew. When you know the truth, many debate, but few humble themselves and suppress the jungle itself. Do them, I just do me, keeping my gold while they trade in their jewelry. Ties to Rican nature-based schooled me. You fool me in your dreams. Dirty Moors think they can mule me. Truly, who's the real Drew? Me and we. I seen more. Their religion is my mental degree, and where everybody's supposed to be. If not, I guess that's not where you're supposed to be. Hopefully, Drew Ali will be seen openly and realize NBC is something you can be. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali. It seems unconscious Moors love the semblance of identity and having no remembrance of their Moorish past, no resemblance of the ancestral land inheritance. Love being the children, not the parents. To do any activity asking for clearance. Their minds like crystal, nothing but clearance. Everyone can progress in their land, the heirs can't. It's your status. Stop blaming racists who bleed just like you if you shank their faces. You Moors flew here in pyramid spaceships, and they use that as an emblem on their aprons, and can't be free if not Moorish Masons. Black or more Europeans are not Caucasians, coming to the new world to civilize pagans. With boats at harbors from mosque on hills, we sending in agents. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali.
We transcend and ascend in this. It's a journey, just like the Moors traveling. Worlds upon worlds that's found within. It gotta touch her as we exhale. Past all distorted truths and the lies they tell to keep y'all from drinking at the well. Divine love, that's the fountain of youth. Sun peep it, this is the alchemist's secret. Restoring true unity, resurrecting a community. So every day I wake to fight. Though it's hard, it's rest guard. In every demonstration I'm penetrating to the depths of the mind. A noble chief, well kept and refined. Your feeling is bright like the star Sirius. This musician is the son of man. I look within, Drew Ali on the canvas of my soul to replenish the whole. Replacing the old is critical, reaching to the pinnacle. Native and original MC that's relevant, and the style is intelligent, but I keep it interesting. Dropping true math in the cipher if you enter in. The law is the center, so study yourself and be renewed. That's elevation, restoration through contemplation and meditation. Now the soul's navigating, manifesting art creation. The roomy of this mic, utilizing the light on the path. My body is an astro lab. I take the right actions, and my compass is compassion for internal alchemy.
The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali. The deaf won't hear, the blind won't see the hidden message in the words of Drew Ali.
It's the same hustle, it's the same pain, the same tears on that we fade. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one channel. It's the same sunshine, it's the same rain.
All right, greetings everybody. My name is Red Tail Hawk, also known as Tavis Sanders. I'd like to welcome my mother, Miss Renee Sanders. We are co-founders of INDEED, which stands for Indigenous Education, Enrichment, and Development, a small nonprofit organization established to educate the public of the omitted history of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Specifically, right now we're dealing with the dark-skinned indigenous peoples of the southeastern portions of the United States. For those, no, we basically have a new crowd here for this one, so we will be able to go over everything again. But basically, we have developed this particular presentation to begin the conversation and to open up individuals' minds to the possibility and to the opportunity to visit an alternative perspective of important historical moments and events that happened here in the Americas during the colonization periods. Particularly, we must pay attention to definitions of terminologies and how these definitions and the terminologies will change. For instance, mulatto, which have gone through about 7 different definition changes over the course of the past maybe 200 to 300 years. And so it really matters what terms we are using and what time reference we are using when we're using these terminologies. For instance, if we're saying that we're a mulatto today, we're black and white. In the 1900s, it was a native and an African. You know, before that, it was in the 1800s, it was a native and African. Before that, it was any foreigner and any native woman. And so, really, that one was after. Okay, so it's many different definitions. It matters. And the reason why it matters is because these are the terms that we are using to classify or identify ourselves. And even if no one else used them, even if we're not using them to identify ourselves, others have. And so we have to make sure that we understand what they were trying to do, what they were trying to cover up, if anything that they were covering up, and what did it do to us? What are the ramifications of allowing other people to identify us? And when it comes down to it, you know, you allow other people to control you. If you allow someone to categorize or identify you, then you are allowing them to set the standards by which they will, from here on out, identify you, the definitions, and who you are as a person. And so, without talking anymore, let me bring my mother up again, revealing America's dark-skinned past. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, thank you. And again, I would also like to welcome you to our presentation, Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past. Hopefully you will be hearing information that you have not heard before. Hopefully you will be seeing some images that you may not have seen before. It is, of course, with hopes that you leave here with some information that that you have learned something while you're here. You'll notice that in our title, we have America's dark-skinned past. Okay, and notice that we have dark skin, we didn't say black. And there's a definite reason for that. That's because black is really it's a social construct that has just been created recently. Okay, and that is because when America or when the United States was being formulated, all of these little constructs, social constructs started to develop. And one of the things is labeling these dark-skinned people and giving them another name than what they originally were. Okay, before the Europeans arrived, there was no race. There was no such thing as race. Race did not exist. Now, people were identified by their skin color. So it could have been this light-skinned person, this olive person, a dark-skinned person, this brown person. But again, it was just an identifier. It was not something that defined who you were. It did not define ethnicity. It did not define your ancestry. It was just an identifier. And it wasn't really until the 1700s was when this concept of race really started developing. And again, you'll see that that is right in line when the British started taking over here in the United States and started developing these racial norms. Okay, but it definitely isn't normal. All right, so as we're learning these things, we need to take race out of the equation, because a lot of times when we hear race or when we hear black, we get emotional about that. Okay, we get emotional about that terminology black or the terminology Negro. You know, we hear Negro and then, you know, something happens to us, you know. And the thing is that we need to take all of that out when we are learning some new material. Because when you're learning, you can't have your emotions in the learning process, because emotions will stop learning. So as you learn, as you're watching these things, try to keep, if you start getting some emotions, you know, try to put them in check, okay? Because again, that was the reason for developing those things, to develop those emotions in us, you know, so that we would feel a certain way when we see that African slave trade, that ship, okay, which was really totally propaganda. That picture is total propaganda. But people don't realize that that was propaganda. That picture is not a real picture, all right? It does not depict how the people were brought over here. It was a propaganda piece to raise your emotions so that you would get emotional, and then when you raise your emotions, your decisions that you make are not the best decisions.
Propaganda is information, ideas, or rumors deliberately spread widely to help or harm a person, group, movement, etc. A word that had just been introduced into the English vocabulary in the early 18th century, but by the end of the century, abolitionists were using this tactic widely as it provided results. At the end of the 18th century, slavery had become a very hot topic in politics here and abroad. While the newly forming United States depended on slavery to fund the colonies, abolitionist views were becoming more widespread and abolitionist subcultures began to emerge. One such group was the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade, a British abolitionist group formed in May of 1787 in London, England. The society worked to educate the public about the abuses of the slave trade by writing and publishing anti-slavery books and pamphlets and creating abolitionist prints and posters. Their most infamous print is the image of the Brooks, an 18th century British slave ship. The Plymouth chapter of the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade acquired detailed measurements of the Brooks, including deck plans, cross-sections, and side views. The abolitionists inserted images of prone black people to demonstrate the possibility of how they could be situated. It was a hypothetical illustration, an image that requires one to think what life is like when people are stored this way. It was an image that could carry its message into the minds of those who did not read the society's literature. Images had rarely been used as a propaganda tool in this way before. This image became one of the first political posters. This propaganda was so effective that it has lasted for centuries. It has sparked our imaginations to create images like this. It has also allowed our psyches to be so empathetic to African slavery that it clouds the fact that only 5% of the African slave trade actually took place on United States soil.
Now, when we're talking about the arrival, when these Europeans arrived here, they arrived to people that were all different complexions. When Columbus was coming over, he knew that he was going to be running into people of color. He knew that because he brought along things that he was trading with the people. Now, in Columbus's logs, very first log, it doesn't say that he was going to try to prove that the world was round. That was not an agenda. They already knew at that time that the world was round. They already knew that. That's why Christopher Columbus was trying to sail west to get to the Indies, because going east to the Indies from Spain, or from the Iberian Peninsula, going east from that point was totally blocked by the Moors. The Moors had everything blocked. They could not get through to India. Okay, so they had to find a different way because they had to keep paying taxes as they were going through. They didn't want to do that anymore, so they wanted to find another route. So that was the purpose, to find India by traveling west. And what they didn't realize is that there was a big continent in the middle. Now, the Europeans didn't know that, all right? The Chinese knew that, though, because they developed a world map in the early 1400s that showed all of the continents that were very accurate, and that was in the early 1400s. So they knew they knew that this continent was there. The Europeans were the ones that were really the ones that were just, they're out of the loop. They just didn't know, okay? But they knew that they were going to be running into dark-skinned people. Why? Because they were going to India. And what did the people look like in India? They were brown-skinned people. So they took the things with them to trade. When they got to the people, that they would have things to trade with and to make friends with these people, find out what their demeanor is, so that when they come back, they can figure out what they're going to do next. Okay, so when the Europeans finally did arrive here, they arrived to a place that had all different colors of people. Okay, now this is a picture that was, I believe it is a Mayan picture, so it is from, I do believe, the Yucatan Peninsula, and you will see that there are all different colored people. Here's a light-skinned person. Here's one who's a little bit browner. We have another one that's a little bit browner still, darker still, and we even have a little blue-black person up there, okay? But again, this is just showing what was here in the Americas already, all right? People of all different complexions. However, when we get here to, and when we start learning our history, this is the image that we now believe that the American Indians or the Native Americans or the indigenous Americans, that's what we think that they look like. So now, how did this happen? Why do we now think that this was the only complexion? And that is because a new image had to be created. The United States was trying to create this black-white society. And so they had to take these people of color that were here, and they had to either put them in one category or the other category. They could either be white or they could be black. There was no in-betweens. And so this is what happened. And the biggest thing that happened is the slave trade and what happened during the slave trade. Now, this is a map, of course, that is of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, you notice they have changed the name of that from the African slave trade to the transatlantic slave trade. And there's a few reasons why. One reason is that all the slaves weren't African, so they couldn't call it the African slave trade. But we will never find that out unless you do some research. There were people that were coming from India that were slaves. There were people that were coming from Madagascar. They were really coming from all over the world that were coming into the United States as slaves. There were white people that were coming as slaves. The Scots, a lot of Scots and Irish were brought into the Americas as slaves. So it wasn't just the African slave trade. So now that's why they call it now the transatlantic slave trade. However, when you pull up the transatlantic slave trade, what comes up? Maps like this, okay? Now, this map is showing, again, the wider numbers are showing where The wider bands are showing the larger numbers of people that were being transported. And you see this is the largest area which was coming from West Central Africa. But notice that there were even people coming from Southeast Africa. There were people that were coming from Madagascar. At least that's what they're showing on this map, because this is, you know, the map of Africa that they're showing. And again, there were people that were coming from all over here in all over areas. But I want you to notice where these lines are ending up. Now notice where these lines are ending up. A very large went down here to South America, but look at the lines up here where the United States. The lines are very, very thin. And they're thin because there were not that many Africans that were brought directly to the United States. It wasn't that many at all. Now this is a chart here. We got it from slavevoyages.org, which is a website that Emory University, which is one of those Ivy League schools that is down in Atlanta, that has participated with them in a lot of different companies to try to get down to the facts of the slave trade and of the transatlantic slave trade. These numbers have changed. If I had shown you a chart from when I first went there, these numbers here, which is the total number, they have 12 million here to 12 million slaves that were brought from Africa. On the first chart, they only had 9 million. So that number has gotten bigger. And another number is this number right here, which is showing the United States and the numbers that came to the United States. At first, these numbers were close to 500,000. They had them down to 300,000. Only 300,000 Africans were brought to the United States. Now, it's like, well, wait a minute. Why are they, you know, why do we get confused about these numbers? Well, one thing is, again, is the wordplay. They will say, oh, 12 million slaves were brought to the Americas, or were brought to America. And that is true. 12 million slaves were brought to America. But we have to understand that America and the United States is two different things. Two different things. And so as we are reading our history, again, we have to realize all these little nuances that is in the writing, that if you don't pay attention to it, you will miss it. And most people miss that America and United States thing. They miss that. There's some other things I'm going to point out also that we just have to pay attention to, because if we don't, we'll just go right by it. So now these numbers here that they're showing, and I just want to point out a couple of numbers to you. The first thing is this number up to 1,800. I totaled all of these right here from when they first started bringing Africans to the shores of the United States down to 1,800. That added up to about 193,000, okay? Which means that up until 1,800, only 193,000 Africans were brought to the shores of the United States. That's really not that many. I looked it up, and right now, that is the entire city of Erie, Pennsylvania is 193,000. So again, that's all that was brought over here from Africa up to 1,800. Now, another thing is this, is that we have to realize that with those numbers, that 2/3 of those numbers were African males. All right? 1/3 of the cargo was children and females. If we only did, there were 22% children. If we only did the females, only 14% of those people were females. Who's making all the slaves if there's only, and that number came up to 26,000. 26,000 females. How are they going to be making all these slaves that were in the United States? Who were these people who were making all of these babies to provide slaves for the United States? And the United States was the only place where we were making our slaves here. That's why the numbers are much smaller, because we were growing our own slaves right here. But who were the people that they were using? They were utilizing the indigenous people here. How else could they come up with these large numbers? So again, up until 1,800, remember, only 193,000. Notice from 1,800 to the end of slavery, notice the numbers there. It's only about 111,000 Africans that were brought in the 1800s to the United States. In actuality, it had been outlawed. Okay, and that's that Juneteenth thing. It was outlawed, but they were still bringing them in. But you see the numbers diminished, okay, where it was only 100, maybe 110,000 that came to the United States during that time. Let's look at the next numbers, though. Watch this. This is the slave population in the United States. Notice in 1800. Notice where they had them. At almost 1 million slaves in the United States in 1800. Now remember, only 193,000 from the beginning of them bringing them here, over 100 years. And, but still, this is the number that they have. I'll say that's close to about 900,000, all right? But remember that from 1800 to 1866, that only 100,000 slaves were brought. But look at the number, 4 million slaves. Where did that number come from? And remember, most of the slave trade were African males. Who were they mating with? They were mating with the indigenous people because, again, when the females were coming over, they had to acclimate to they're riding on a boat for 3 months, which is going to knock your system totally out of whack. Okay, and most of the females, when they came over, they were not able to bear children. That's what happened in the other countries, all right? That's why they had to keep bringing slaves into the other countries. They weren't doing what the United States was doing. The United States was making sure that they had a slave population by creating that slave population, which is what they did, by blending these African people in with the Native Americans. The Native Americans didn't have any problem with it. They became part of the family. And again, because the females were the ones that were bearing the children, then they were definitely indigenous or native to the land. Okay? So let's go on. So now, then we may then say, okay, now, when did dark-skinned people come here to the Americas then? When did they first arrive? But again, I say the better question is, when did people arrive to the Americas? Because again, remember, there is no such thing as race, all right? When you had the migrations, which we are about to show a map of that now. When they arrived over in Asia, they no longer called the people Africans. They were Asians at that point. When they reached India and started to develop, they weren't called that, they were called Indians. When they reached Australia, they became Australians. Okay, so of course then when they reached the America, they should be Americans. Okay, why do they now, why do now when they reached America that now black people have to say, oh, we're African American? They don't say African Asian. They don't say African Indian. They don't say African Australian. So why do we have to claim that when you come here? Again, that's that emotional thing that they're trying to put into you. So again, we got to take those emotions out. But again, now, with this migration, and again, it's a theory, all right? Theories are guesses. This is a theory that was developed in the 1700s, early 1700s. And it really hasn't changed much since then. And that's ridiculous that it hasn't changed much, especially today with the information that they have today. But they still have not changed this theory, because it was something that they developed and they don't want to change it. They don't want to change this theory. And so anytime they develop a theory and it stays in the books for a long time, there's an old saying, when the fiction becomes the truth, teach the fiction. Okay, so now this fiction now has become truth, and so this is what they teach. That was a line that was a John Wayne line in a movie, Who Shot Liberty Valance? I think it was that movie. Yeah, but that was a line, but that's what history has become, It's become a lie that they just continually, say, and we started to believe it. Now, so again, they're showing these people, they said the early humans left out of here around 100,000 years ago. They reached Asia, let's say around 50,000 years ago. They venture on down to Australia, which is 40,000 years ago. And then they say on across Beringia, okay, it is a strait now, but back then it was a entire landmass. So these lines here are the lines of what the landmass was, and that was all ice. Okay, so when the ice melted, the ice caps melted, and then it exposed the land, and so now that's why that's a strait now. But it was a land bridge at that time. And then, so of course, you're coming on into the Americas. Notice they have, by 12,000, they've gotten down past the ice caps into the Americas, and then on down and into South America by 10,000 or 11,000 years ago. Okay, now, this is a theory that they have developed. Again, it has been told over and over and over again. This is the story that we have heard. However, guess what? There are some problems with this. First, again, there's the Beringia. They had them coming across, and they said that there was a little land bridge that was an ice-free corridor, made it down into here. And this is an area, Folsom and Clovis is in New Mexico, and this is an area where they first started finding Native American tools. Okay, so they named the tools their Clovis tools. And then they called the first people Clovis people. Now again, these are people that first arrived across the Bering Strait. However, again, now these are some of the tools that they had. These, again, were called Clovis points. Now the problem is that they have run into points or tools that are older than Clovis. Most of these points are on the eastern side of the Americas. Greetings, and welcome to Indeed's Moments in Indigenous Education, which focuses on historical facts which have been omitted or forgotten. Please join us for today's topic.
Today's topic is blood and Native identity. In 1897, the Smithsonian Institute's Bureau of American Ethnology wrote in its annual report that, and I quote, "The blood of the Southern Negro is unquestionably Indian," end quote. The Bureau, whose focus was on North American Indian cultures, was established in 1879 by Congress. According to the Bureau, and I quote the full quote, "As the coast tribes dwindled, they were compelled to associate and intermarry with Negroes until they finally lost their identity and were classed with that race, so that a considerable portion of the blood of the Southern Negro is unquestionably Indian," end quote. So you may ask, if it was known that the blood of Southern Negroes was unquestionably Indian, and Indian blood is what defines who an American Indian is, why is it difficult for dark-skinned people to claim their Native identity? The answer lies in colonial laws, which made slave blood negate Indian blood.
It's the same hustle, it's the same thing, the same tears on everything. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one ghetto. It's the same sunshine, it's the same rain, the same struggle just to maintain. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one ghetto. Yeah. Somebody found working fingers to the bone. Somebody got a cousin getting that thug feels alone. Somebody fam got weight on the block, AKs on the block, might spray on the block, y'all. Somebody fam still on welfare, oh yeah. Somebody on the grind for daycare, oh yeah. If you got thugging in your family.
First of all, I would say from my standpoint that there are some African Americans that African, but from my take and my family and many others, we don't identify with having to come from Africa. I have no ties to Africa, none whatsoever, with the past 13 generations that I can name on my mother and father's side, my ancestors. I can't find any African in that link back to that time. So having said that, no. But what most people don't understand is Native American slavery. And Native American slavery was 200 to 300 years ahead before the first African hit these shores. Most folks don't understand that because they're given the perception that Indian owned slaves, and they show you the Cherokees owning slaves. But what they don't say, one of the major Cherokee slave owners, John Ross, they said was 1/8 or 1/64 Cherokee. So if you ask me, if I calculate that up, that is a Caucasian. According to his history, he could not even speak Cherokee. So folks must understand the dynamics of Caucasians being assembled among tribes and leading these tribes, and they understand that from that standpoint. Now, let's deal with 1682, and I'm going to start in Virginia. I spent the past 10 years studying colonial law as it deals with Native Americans and as it deals with reclassifications of race. So in 1682, Virginia decided to create two acts. In the act that we're going to deal with, Virginia said Native Americans or Indians and Africans will be placed under the umbrella of Negro. That started in Virginia. Negro was a Portuguese term used to describe indigenous people. So in the colonial time in America, you had Indian Negroes and you had African Negroes. Now, South Carolina adapted that and came up with something called the Negro Law of South Carolina. If you go and Google the Negro Law of South Carolina, you will find this congressional record. And it talks about Indians as well as Africans, free people of color, free Africans, free Indians. But what history doesn't also tells you, there were European Negroes, which were British slaves that were in South Carolina colonial times. That's a history not even talked about. So now we're going to go back and we're going to deal with the Indian Negroes who were in slavery. Because what happens today when historians start talking and activists start talking and they're telling about African Americans in the 16, 17, 18, early 1900s, I have an issue with that because who are you talking about? Because that term did not exist. So you have to deal with the definition. So understanding this from a forensic standpoint, Negro in colonial times, you were talking about two different sets of people. You were talking about the Americans, the Indians, and you were talking about the Africans in slavery. And I use the term like mixing fruit cocktails. Because after the slavery, everybody is colored or everybody is black. And please keep in mind, black is not a race. It is a color. It is looked upon as being a race, been accepted as being a race. It is a color. So folks really need to understand this. I deal with my ethnicity of who I am. I am a Yuchi Indian. And my grandmother and my grandaunt and my grandfather and my parents made sure I never forget it. I drank it day in and day out. My aunt will always say, we may be called black, but we ain't come from Africa. We from right here. The Yuchi Indians have been on the Savannah River for over 1,000 years, and the Ogeechee River. Thousands of years. When the first Europeans came and saw us, they say these people have the hue of the Ethiopian and the Egyptian. So what does that say?
So they were
Folks
comparing.
don't understand because they don't know the history of Native American slavery. And South Carolina, listen to me, brother, listen to me carefully. South Carolina has the most pristine records of Native American slavery and colonial race reclassification than any other state. Now, as I speak tonight, I speak from South Carolina. But keep in mind, Georgia was created out of South Carolina, and Alabama was created out of Georgia. So in the beginning, it was the Carolinas. But a lot of people don't realize, again, that a lot of the Spanish Moors and Morocco, who granted South Carolina their first charter as an independent sovereign state, helped colonize the Carolinas. South Carolina created a law in the 1600s called the Moor Sundry Act. And what this act did, it classified free African as white. So on the census, you got to be very careful because now I'm speaking to you from a forensic genealogist point of view. Your ancestors, depending on who they are, if you know who they are, may be coded as white on the census when you go back and do your genealogy search, and you think you've got the wrong person. No, you have the right person if you have the location. Majority of them were slave owners. They held property.
What are one of the ways, Alonzo? Is that a reverb on my end?
Yeah, that's an echo.
Let me cut the gain down. What about now? Hello?
Better. Yeah, that's better.
Okay, Alonzo, why is this seems to be one of what you're talking about now seems to be one of the ways that there is so much confusion and animosity in the community by the way you're explaining it. Could that be the reason?
We're not the same people. We never were the same people. We were all combined, those that were slaves, those that were not. So after the end of slavery, let me explain something else about South Carolina. South Carolina, when they came in to enslave, they conquered entire villages. Villages might have 5,000, 10,000 people. Could be 40, 50, 60, maybe 100,000 acres. And those native villages became plantations. And those plantations today are townships and cities. In the early stage of Native American slavery, when they started bringing the Africans over, They didn't enslave them on the same plantation. That only happened at a different time. Native Americans enslaved the whole village. No one's going to run away. Now, what you got to understand, when you go do your research now, you have to look at what type of plantation this was. Was it a cotton plantation? Was it a rice plantation? Or a sugarcane plantation? 98% of your sugar plantations are your Native American slaves. Your cotton plantations are your African slaves. And your rice plantations. You have to investigate the plantation owner because they had to have permits. Did he have a permit to own Native American slaves? Did he have a permit to own African slaves? Or did he have a permit for British slaves? Scottish and your Irish. These things are very key. Now, South Carolina did a whole lot of domestic slave trading with Native Americans, which means many of your ancestors ended up into Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and other places in the West Indies because that was a domestic trade. Well, you say, well, how is that a domestic trade and that's not part of the United States? I'm sorry, because in the 1600s, South Carolina had a governor named Governor Linton, Henry Linton. Henry Linton was the governor of Jamaica and South Carolina and governed certain parts of the Barbados because all of that was a part of the South Carolina province. That's why you won't find any slave trade direction coming from the United States going to the islands. It won't be on the transatlantic slave because it's domestic. So you have to understand that. So as you go do your genealogy search, that is very important. The other thing to keep in mind is to study the immigration maps. Where did the slave owner come from? Because in South Carolina had about 274 pre-African slave owners. So you have to understand, why wasn't this information given? You got to go back and look at Reconstruction. What were they trying to reconstruct? Then after Reconstruction, we get Jim Crow. We get laws that saying coloreds can't read, can't go to school, can't become policemen, can't be judges. Why? So you will go into the public records and find out that before the Civil War, your ancestors may have been landowners. Your ancestors may have been slave owners and not vice versa. Your ancestors may have fathered white children and they were the slave masters, beside it being vice versa. These are things folks need to be concerned about because the average genealogist don't teach this. But I'm telling you this from a forensic standpoint. You look at your slave manifest. Your slave manifests are the logs. It tells you where the slave's going, who owned the slave, what color is the slave. If you read the slave manifest, you will see slaves that are gold, that are yellow, that are black, that are white, that are brown, that are tan. So you need to keep in mind. So just so happened the color black stopped for some reason. You got to keep in mind with that because these things are very, very important. Another thing that I teach and I tell people all the time, you got to be careful with the size of the slave ship. Folks don't really understand. Say, what do you mean by that, Langley? Okay, along the Savannah River, the channels are very narrow. I can swim from one side to the other in probably 2 minutes. So the channel is no more than about 25 or 30 yards. So you're not going to get no ship down there. You're going to get a boat because the draft is not going to carry it. And how many people on the little boat going down there? 25, 30 maybe? It wasn't no 200-300, not in that area. So you have to question now, where did all these massive ships come from? Not mainland inside of America. No. May have been certain amount of size of ships going to the Caribbean. No. It's impossible. These are facts because if you read the Slave Manifest, it tells you the capacity of the ships, the size of the ships. These things are very, very important. For the cotton trade down in Buford, it tells you. And in Charleston, where are these slaves coming from? Why was cotton so important, Egyptian cotton? Because the Africans knew how to grow it. Wasn't for the Africans, wouldn't be no cotton here. So the British loved cotton. And there were 7 African nations that are listed in South Carolina congressional records that had to do with slavery and participated and sent their people over here as well as other tribes. And they sent people over here, these tribes who knew how to grow cotton, knew how to deal with iron, and very other tasks. These were specialists that they sent over here. You have to understand, slavery had nothing to do with black or white. It had to do with capitalism at that time. Jim Crow made it about black and white and racism. I checked the laws. I looked at the record to see how far when you look to see how many people were hung. In slavery days, the numbers was very low because a slave was your property and they had to have insurance on slave and their cost. Your African slave was your Rolls Royce. But after slavery and in the years of Jim Crow, hanging and lynching, according to the record, expanded over 500 to 1,000%, depending on where you are. They wasn't trying to kill their slaves. So I have to question certain parts of roots and certain events that happened, because from a scientific perspective and what's in the colonial records, certain events didn't take place. Yes, slavery happened. It did. But the multitude of 5,000-6,000 people, 400 or 500 people on a big slave ship coming down the Savannah River, no, you can't sit in an airplane for 8 hours without having to get up and stretch. So you mean to tell me you're going to chain someone down in a boat and cross the Atlantic for 4 months and their muscles are not being utilized? And they're going to get off the ship when they arrive and start picking cotton. Any medical doctor will tell you, I don't think about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're with Chief Lonzo Langley from the UGND tribe, and he's sharing some knowledge with us that we all need. Alonzo, why are the congressional records so important?
I would prefer everyone study your state colonial records, because these records deals with the statute law and the reclassification of people. The Native American slaves that have been written out of history are written out of history due to slavery. It doesn't mean that the people don't exist. It means that they reclassified these people as Negroes and wrote these tribes out of existence. So where are the descendants of these tribes today? Many of them are under the umbrella of African American and don't know it because they haven't researched or know it their history because they have been moved around a lot. My family didn't get out of the South till about 1970, 1975. They didn't go anywhere. They stayed in South Carolina and Georgia along the Savannah River, in Allendale County, in Barnwell County, in Georgia, in Spring County. That's where they are today. And they have been there for over a period of 600 years. Within our graveyards and cemeteries, they call them, are mounds. Those are my ancient ancestors. But that type of history don't get exposed because the concept is there's nothing down there but some Negroes and African Americans. But if you read South Carolina colonial law, South Carolina colonial laws will tell you what tribes, where they were located, who went into slavery. Now, there's one side of my family that was enslaved. There's another side that was not. I got a will of one of my grandfathers. He held several of his cousins in slavery to keep them from being sold to another plantation, whether in the Bahamas or Jamaica or outside of South Carolina or another plantation. They coded him as white because he converted to Christianity. And that's another thing folks need to realize. My family didn't do all that different name changing. My name went from Lawande to Kipahawa to Upichi to Langley and Roberts. So it's very easy for us to trace back. Because if I look at old colonial maps and land deeds, the original name of my ancestors is on there before they took on a Christian name. Now, I don't see my family as an isolated incident. I see my family as knowing who we were and didn't move around a lot. So when folks look at us, what do you mix with? What do you mean? Your hair is straight? Y'all mix with half white? No. Why I gotta be that? We're Yuchi Indians. This is who we are. No Native American tribe looks the same. Don't get shattered by that. What you see today and what you see on TV, Hollywood, ain't reality always. Don't buy into it. I call it the Barbie doll syndrome. Which doll is prettier? This is the one that we would show. Because there were Native Americans dark as Sambo, with straight hair, with big nose. All you have to do is go look in the archives and look at the old pictures from the 1900s on back to the 1800s. And see who these people look like. And you will find your people as your uncle, your aunt, your cousin, your grandmom, your granddaddy, being called Negro.
My sister and I went down to the Alabama archive yesterday in Montgomery, and we were just mind blown by the information that was down there, validating everything that you just said. And it was amazing. We were both in another world. And she was telling me about a picture she saw of a woman. The woman was 6 feet tall, and her husband was about 5'6", 5'7", and the look in their eyes, it's like you were saying earlier that we are different people. The look that they had in their eyes, the way they were looking, it was something like she'd never seen before. I'm wondering, Chief. I'm getting a lot of emails and I'm getting a lot of inquiries about this DNA. You know, everybody's paying for these DNA tests. Are those DNA tests valid? And if they are, what do they tell us?
I am a computer scientist by degree. I am also an engineer. I deal with black and white, and I deal with common sense. They have never really been scientific proven unless you've taken a DNA test for paternity. So if you want to take a DNA test and go dig up the oldest ancestor you have in your church or your family cemetery, by all means go take a DNA test. Because you're doing it with your relatives. How is it possible for native people who converted to Christianity or took European names, where are these surnames based upon? Because it's European. I have I have a serious problem with it. Oh, sure, you'll be genetic cousins, but you're not blood cousins. Yes, they improvement. How is DNA going to tell me who my relative was 10,000 years ago? It's not a scientific fact. It's a guess, like Einstein's theory of relativity. It never been proven. They take it to be fact. But you have people out there that live and die by DNA. I don't believe in it. I don't need it. I will never take one. Why should I take one if I can go back to 1725? Documentation on my family. I can go back another 60 years with oral stories. I'm not going to take one. I think it's laziness when people get into it. And what people really need to do, your ancestors, your great-grandma or your great-aunt or great-grandpa left you something. And when he said, my mother was an Indian, my daddy was an Indian, so what does make you think that you're not an Indian? The blood just died out and disappeared with you? This is how colonial law has come into play. Everyone needs to go research the census of 1930. Take my word for it. Go read it.
Well, what will we find in the census of 1930?
Race classification that is biased. And what I mean by that, if your mother was an Indian and your father was black, you were black.
But
if your mother was white and your father was an Indian or vice versa, you were Indian or you were white. Any drop of black blood they claim made you black. But I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say it very carefully. Black is a color, not a necessity. So what most people don't understand, by not studying the racial laws, when those folks came out of slavery to everybody under the umbrella of Negro, you don't know what your ancestors are, so you have to go by your oral stories or do some detective work by becoming a forensic genealogist and dissect the situation. How do you dissect it? I said it about 20 minutes ago. Learn the plantation. Learn what type of plantation it was. As a matter of fact, check the type of pottery that your ancestors made. You ain't gonna find no African making Native American pottery, or vice versa. He made the pottery of his tribe. Look at the baskets. See what the baskets are. Was it a Native American basket? African basket. What tribe? None of it is the same. It's comparable. It will tell you. These are key things folks miss, and you shouldn't. That's why I'm pointing these details out to you to look for. Luckily, I'm speaking tonight from my own experience. This is my story. There are a lot of natives out there. Why you always talk about history? Because it applies to me. This is my story. You went to Oklahoma. We didn't. And there's another thing. If you went to Oklahoma, the same skin tone you and I are now, or you lived on a reservation, on that reservation, you are what your tribe was. Whether you was Ute, Swanee, Cherokee, Choctaw, you're on the reservation, that's who you are. You're living out in the community, you're Negro or you're colored or you're white, depending on what community you lived in. If you're native and you're living in a majority white community, they classified you as white. If you lived in a majority black community, they classified you as black. These are things folks are not understanding, but when you go back and look at the census enumerators, it tells you this. The best thing everybody can do that's listening to me right now is study the history of the census. Not the census, study the history of it. And when you study the history of it, go and look at the state and local statute code of laws that govern race. Because if you find a community with 500 muskies or 500 mulattoes, what do you mean by muskie? Muskie is what they call a Native American mixed with an African. That offspring is a muskie. If an Indian is mixed with white, they called them mulatto back then. These are different words and phrases they're playing with. Folks don't understand it.
Chief, what was the purpose of marching people to Oklahoma?
Land, bottom line. And let me tell you something. There are more resistance with going to Oklahoma than the books really want to tell. The Seminoles fought a 50-year war. If you read Jackson's diary, I love to read diaries of these people. And Jackson's diary was the Seminole War, his classification of that, and said, oh my Lord, this is a Negro war. That's in his diary. So we have to understand something here. Let's take the term maroon. Black and red equal maroon. This is how it's taught to me. So the natives and the Indians in South Carolina that ran away in the swamp and had offspring, they called them maroons. This is in South Carolina congressional records now. Now let's talk about the black Seminole. We're talking a totally different person now. Because the black Seminole, according to the congressional records, is a former slave who ran away and lived among the Indians. Now when we get down to Florida, we have black Seminoles, we have maroons, they done grouped everybody together. So now they say black Indians. Well, how so? When you got a mixture of a native and an African. Another word for that you will hear your grandmother say is Blackfoot, because Blackfoot is the offspring of a native and an African. That's not the Blackfoot tribe. That was the derogatory word that was used. There wasn't no Blackfoot down in the South. Not in South Carolina and Georgia. So your parents could be right, and your parents are right saying they're native, but they're wrong by saying Blackfoot and Cherokee because these tribes wasn't in certain areas. So you have that right. So what do you have to do now to clear the situation? What you have to do now is sit down and start studying old colonial maps. Look at tribal territory maps and follow those maps back up. Don't start now and work your way back. Go to the earliest time of invasion and follow the colonies and watch how the land division changes. Land doesn't go nowhere. The name of places change. You will identify with the area that your tribe was most dominant in or that tribal town. So now you know what tribe you descend from. It's not mathematics. It's not hard. It's taking the time out to detail and study your history. And that's why I'm here tonight to give you this information that has been in my family for years, whether they talked about it or not. You're wasting your time, some of you, to go look across the border, across the water to Africa, and your ancestors ain't never been no way but where they are. Most older generation, 3 generations back, if you were from the back boondocks, you didn't migrate out. See? My family, a lot of them might get upset for me saying this, but this is common among Native American people. This is part of my story. We all intermarried. I got cousins marrying cousins. 3 generations back, we share the same grandmother and grandfather. 2 more generations back from that, there it goes again. But when you get out of your tribalness, these type things happen. You're no longer communicating. You don't know who's who. Somebody says, well, those are Williams over there. That's a different set. I tell you what, you better go back 2 or 3 generations and look and see if it's a separate set. Same people. Because you've been cut off.
Chief,
it's very important to understand this. Go ahead, man.
What would you say to the people who are adamant that they are from Africa, but when they are asked when they're from Africa, where they're from, they don't know?
I would say, if that's what they want to embrace, and as the old Christian song says, you die and your soul be lost, ain't nobody fault but you. I am not going to preach because some people are not going to get it because they embrace that. That's what they want to be. That's fine. That's your perspective. That's what you should do. But don't hinder me. I'll take the concept. Yes, everybody descends from Africa. How many thousands of years you talking about? 50? 100? 200,000 years? The word Africa is no more than about 600 years old that came into play around the same time. America Vespucius decided to call America America. And on the old maps, it was called Byland. So the Roman Emperor Africanus, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, named Africa. But there's so much discussion now, that may not be the location. So I deal with history that deals with 600-700 years back. Let's just deal with that. Because folks going on the old myths and 10,000 years and 20,000 years, no, that ain't gonna do me no good. I accept that. But in the last 500 years, or the last 600 years, or the last 700 years, I descend from America. I am home. I went to Africa one time on a mission with the Army Corps of Engineers. I was working on a telehealth project. We stopped in Singapore. We was traveling to Singapore because we had to go to Asia. And I'm sitting in the lobby. And I walked up, and this African said to me, "Cotton picker maybe, African absolutely not." Did you hear what I just said?
Cotton picker maybe. African
Cotton
absolutely
picker
not.
maybe, African absolutely not. They know their people like I know my people.
Today is Thursday, January 23rd, 2014. African American and African Radio. We're joined by Chief Langley from the Yuchi tribe. Chief, earlier we talked about the Racial Integrity Act. Could you talk to the audience about what the Racial Integrity Act is and how it applies to us?
The Racial Integrity Act of 1924, I have some friends that are from Virginia. Oh, they can explain that more beautifully than I can because they lived it. But this is what I'm going to tell you is according to what I've read, I've discussed with my colleagues. Dr. Plecker decided to reclassify people in Virginia who was native to say that there are no more Indians in the state of Virginia. So he classified them as colored or Negro and wrote them out of existence. Now, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 brings about and expresses the one drop blood rule. You got to understand this. That's why your mother could be native or your father could be native and one parent's black, you're black. You can have your great-great-great-great-grandfather an African and everybody else was 6th generation up as native, which you done married a complete African out in that many generations, you are still considered black. But remember, black is a color, not a race. White, on the other hand, native and white will equal native or white. Oklahoma passed a law, Supreme Court law, many, many years ago, only about 100 years ago, that all Indians are white. The law benefited them. The Dawes Roll benefited them. And you have to be very careful with the Dawes Roll, because those names on the Dawes Roll are common and may not apply to you. There are too many groups going around pushing this, and people are getting played. And I'm telling you from my own experience, the Dawes does not apply to you unless you know your family was in Oklahoma and they came back. You really don't need it. You really don't. What you need to do is understand your history. There are tribes out there that are in existence that don't even use the Dawes Roll because it don't apply to them. What you need to understand is the racial reclassification codes in your colonial state that has reclassified you. Get yourself in the mood of start studying Native American law within that state and say, hey, no, my people were reclassified. This is who I am, and I can prove it. And when you go back and look at the congressional law and look at the census, you'll understand it. Most folks go online and deal with Ancestry.com because the federal census every 10 years. I like to use something when I assist people called Family Search, because Family Search deals with a 5-year census and a 2-year census. And those 5-year census is state. 2-year census is your counties. People moving in and out. You will find your people a lot better from what I have seen with Family Search. Because it's going to deal with short timelines. and going to deal with the little local courthouses, not the federal. A lot can happen in 10 years. People move around a lot. People may have changed their names. And be careful with that on the census, too. Because your ancestors' name might be spelled one way, and you're looking at it a different way, or the last name might be first, and the first name is last. They're the same people. I have seen this hundreds of times. Hundreds of times. So you can't overlook that. Your grandparents, your ancestors have given you a roadmap. When they say Indian, then folks say, I don't want to use the word Indian, that is indigenous. I'm going to take it with me all the way to the bank. Because that's how I identify my people. My people had to convert back from colored to Negro to back to Yuchi. In today's time, those that are not tribal, they have to convert back from African American to colored to Negro to Yuchi. Because that's who we are.
9910 area code calling. Caller, did you have a question?
No, I didn't. I was just calling. I thought it was just a listen-in.
Okay. Chief, you sent me a email last week about in North Carolina, where this county, Franklin County, North Carolina, burned some records, some 160-year-old documents. Intentionally, they destroyed these records. Why would a county do that?
Opening up Pandora box, if I can use that phrase, because those documents will show who these major landowners are and who are the heirs. And it would have brought about a serious rut for the state in regards to heirs reclaiming their property. They didn't want to deal with that. It may have bankrupt North Carolina. So why would they bury it? You got 160-year-old documentation. You know how many genealogy brick walls that would have prevented, brought about solutions, but they choose to burn them.
Well, Chief, the question I have is, with us claiming that we're Africans, with us claiming that we're Moors, with us claiming that we're Hebrew Israelite, with us claiming that we're Muslim, doesn't those claims that we make on all these other nations around the world, doesn't that make what is ours here, doesn't that nullify that?
I'm going to take one of those that you used, and I'm going to deal with it, and that is the Moor. And the reason I'm going to address the Moors is from a South Carolina congressional perspective and relationships that South Carolina had with Morocco. Now, I'm not going to bash these guys, but I'm going to give you South Carolina perspective. If they're claiming sovereignty in the United States, they don't have it because they're not indigenous to this area. You are indigenous to Africa and Morocco, for one. Because every year, the Sultan of Morocco, either the Prince of Morocco, either he comes or an agent of his come to South Carolina in a ceremonial and inspect the South Carolina National Guard. In the 1700s, the Negroes who were free, South Carolina passed the Suntree Act to label those Moors as white. So they're white on the census. But what a lot of people are not understanding, the Moors at that time was a society. a society like the Freemasons. To be honest with you, a lot of Masonic stuff comes from the Moors, but that's another conversation to have. They're not sovereign. Not here. Then why are they constantly going to jail? Morocco doesn't recognize them. What those cats need to do is go stop reading some of these books and go look into the colonial laws that identify who the Moors are in South Carolina.
Now, why is
Because
South
that's where that
Carolina,
law- Go ahead.
Chief, why is South Carolina so important to what you're talking about? What makes South Carolina the leading?
Because the Carolinas were colonized by the Moors in the early days. That's another big part of history. Study the Spanish Moors, the Moors' conquest of North America. Read that book. And go to South Carolina and look at the Moors from the congressional record. Look at the state papers on the Moors. That's why. A lot of the Moors, especially the Spanish Moors, invaded this continent with Columbus and also De Soto. De Soto had Spanish Africans with him on his Native American raids. Go read the book of Chesto Menendez. You think it's Spanish, but if you go and read it, you will find out he was a Spanish African. He was a Moor. I'm not friends with the Moors from that perspective. I know their history. You came in raping and enslaving Native American people in South Carolina. It's in the congressional records. They need to check their history on that. Well, I ain't never read it. Well, go read South Carolina congressional record. There's a reason why, a very good reason why, South Carolina decided to classify Negroes who were slave owners as Moors and give them the status of being white. It is public information. You have a lot of these cats take information and then put their own spin on it. That's very dangerous. That's why I don't like reading a lot of books from a lot of authors, because you got to understand, is he pro this or is he pro that? Because he's going to write it in a biased perspective. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand exactly what you're saying.
Those cats have no sovereignty here in America. Not in South Carolina, unless they come from Morocco. Because that's who granted South Carolina their first charter. Morocco.
Wow.
It's public information.
Chief,
You will do your... Go ahead.
Chief, could you talk to us about the treaties?
There's a treaty of 1866. Now, the Treaty of 1866 talk about Negroes. Now, what I want everyone to understand, in 1866, that was after the Indian removal, and the removal was between 1832 and 1836. So the 1866 treaty, which deals with the 5 civilized tribes and the freemen. But check this out. It was an African Creek chief, Kowtow, that initiated this treaty for the Creeks. A month ago, I had dinner in California with his 9th generation grandson. Perryman. Like Perryman kept his history, I have my history. We had a meeting up the creek in the UTN, California. It was a wonderful 2 hours. That doesn't apply unless you know your family was in Oklahoma and they came back. So having to jump on that wagon and say the 1866 treaty applied to me and you haven't been tribal. Well, if you were tribal and came back, yes, you need to be looking at the Freedmen Bureau of those 13 colonies, of those southern states, that deals with that 40 acres and a mule that was lost. You need to deal with the defranchised people. Who are these defranchised people? Who are the people who was reclassified? Who are the refugees? Because if you read the Freeman Rule, it talks about the refugees, the freemen, and abandoned land. Well, who were the refugees? The Native Americans? And the Africans? That under Negroes? That come from separate plantations? Unless they were enslaved with these Native American tribes, and at that point, the Africans and the natives were together. But in South Carolina, it is documented fact that Native Americans and Africans, not all were on the same plantation if you look at the timelines. So you know you got a mixture of people who are different. It's a fact. Check the records. I'm not going to give you what a historian gives you. I'm going to give you where the historian gets his information. Go to the congressional records. Leave that treaty alone, because what you're going to do, you're really going to embarrass yourself. Like a lot of people I know, well, my grandmother shows up on the Dawes Roll. Were your grandmother in Oklahoma? No. Well, you better search the Dawes and see where these events were taking place at the time, because that may be a common name, and most time it is. But people don't realize when many people from the South migrated to Oklahoma, when they got to Oklahoma, they named the places in Oklahoma the same names of the places in Georgia and Alabama. My grandmother that raised me from 3 days old, born 1912 in Stillwell, Georgia, Ruby Lee Langley. There's a Ruby Lee Langley in Stillwell, Oklahoma, born 1912. Wow. I'm going to tell you two things happen. Either there's some identity fraud going on, or there's another Ruby Langley out there in Oklahoma. But since I'm not using the Dawes Roll for any BIA benefits, I'm going to leave it alone, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to deal with the racial reclassification. Or you reclassified my people, disenfranchised them, placed them in Native American slavery, called them Negro, and they are not. I'm going to approach that from a South Carolina perspective and deal with them on a state issue. My folks were reclassified. We have a tribe. We had one from day one. A lot of people don't realize, okay, well, Langley, where did you have your tribe? Our tribe was here. Where do you have your services? In the church. Because when South Carolina and Georgia and many other southern states decided that there were no more Indian people in the state, and they called them colored, these tribes, these clans had their meetings in the churches. So a chief became a deacon or officer in the church. Sometimes the preacher. But most times, the medicine man became the preacher. See, something a lot of people miss, and that is when you used to see your granduncle or your grandfather or great put on that little church hat and stick that little feather in the side, that was a sign. That was his chief hat. That's a part of history that's overlooked, and many of y'all in the black community can relate to seeing that. Because that's what my ancestors did. Daddy always, this is my chief hat. Why is he wearing the feather? Symbolic. This is common, but folks don't know the history.
Chief, you talked about earlier. You were talking earlier about the AME Church. Could you let the audience in on that, please?
Oh yeah, we can go dig in that one. That's my baby. Oh man. Oh yes. There was a church in Scriven County, Georgia, Asbury, named after Francis Asbury. Francis Asbury was a disciple of John Wesley. John Wesley brought Methodism to Georgia and to the United States. Francis Asbury would ride through Indian country, converting Native Americans to Christianity. As a result of that, we have the Colored Methodist Church. But a lot of people don't realize the Colored Methodist Church was the Indian church. Then you had the White Methodist Church. Then you had the African Church. So when South Carolina and Georgia decided there are no more Indians in the state, the Indians had to make a choice. Either they were going to consolidate with the white Methodists or consolidate with the African Methodists. So a lot of the natives identified with the Free Africans and joined the African Methodist Church. So Asbury AME Church in Savannah, Georgia, that my family has been going to since the beginning of time because my ancestors helped establish that church. And it became from Asbury Colored Church to Asbury AME Church. Now, Richard Allen in Philadelphia, in Delaware, in Maryland, is credited to starting the AME Church. But what folks need to understand, and I ain't taking nothing from Richard Allen, he was a disciple of Francis Asbury that gave them the Episcopal Charter. But Richard Allen, according to his diaries, he never traveled south because he feared he would be put in slavery. But according to documents that I've read, even his mother was Native American. Don't quote me on it. That's what I've read. So a lot of the traditions, I give you a tradition. Homecoming, Harvest Day. That's Green Corn Festival. If you go to Asbury, you'll see folks doing the Holy Ghost dance, and look at some of the tribes in Oklahoma, you will think they're doing the Ghost dance. Why is that? Because there were Native American people in Asbury that brought those traditions inside of the church. And when we couldn't practice it outwardly, they were practiced inside of the church. So the church became an institution to keep the tribe alive and going. That is a fact. Anybody else tell you otherwise, they don't know the history or they're trying to disregard it. But they cannot tell me about Asbury AME Church in Savannah, Georgia.
One of the things that we hear about in the community, or that's very relevant in the community when talking about the females, are what are called red bone. Could you tell us about what a red bone is?
There was a tribe up in North Carolina of mixed race people. Read, there's a congressional book out on Native Americans of Native Americans of North Carolina. Excellent book. It was written back in the 1800s. If you don't have it, I will send you the link, and it talks about the characteristics of the red bone, which were mixed race people of Native, African, and white. They call them red bones. They are known today as a tribe called the Sherrock. Some are called Lumbee. Many of the red bones were sent to Louisiana according to the domestic migrations from South Carolina to Louisiana. That's where the term red bone comes from. They didn't just pick that out. There was a tribe. Well, enough of them, they decided to start calling folks red bone. You see them all the time. Me and you grew up with that. That's a red bone. Tribes that are written out of history are people who descend from slavery. Their descendants are still here. They may not assemble as a tribe anymore, but those descendants are here because they wrote them out of history. But soon as people identify who they are, they need to go back into their tribes.
Area code 225. Did you have a question for the chief?
Actually, I'm just calling in, just listening in and trying to, I guess, just get more education or just learn and see what you guys are talking about. I was referred by Dr. Leonora Netwe in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Okay, so what are you thinking about what you're hearing so far?
I actually just called in and I haven't heard anything. So I've only been on for not even a minute, just 40-something seconds.
Any other callers waiting on hold? Did anybody have any questions of what you heard about so far?
I'm on the line, Carrie. Tennille.
Tennille, did you have any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay, Chief, what information do you see at this time that is viable that the African American community knows at this time?
Can you repeat that question or rephrase it? Because I'm not understanding what exactly.
As you look around America, as you look around the communities and what's going on in America, I'm talking about from all four corners of America, what is the most important thing that the people who call themselves African Americans, what is the most important thing that they need to know? Or how would you tell them to search their families? How would they go about that?
First of all, I would say go to your state archives and start studying the congressional laws which govern race of that state in colonial times. South Carolina has the Negro Law. Virginia has the Racial Integrity Law, Racial Integrity Act. I am quite sure other states did exactly the same thing and may have patterned their laws and their statute laws after Virginia or South Carolina. But there's a fascinating thing about Virginia that's rarely told that I found in the Virginia to the southern states migration. Virginia had, in 1690, they expelled 60,000 free Africans. Those free Africans in Virginia went south. Many of them ended up in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Mainly the Carolinas, because it is known the Carolinas was colonized by the Moors. And at that time, there were more black free slave owners in the Carolinas than the Virginians. Now, so say, Chief, where do you get this information from? Go search the timeline. The timelines of colonial migrations. If you don't have it, get with the caller. I will give it to him, and he will email it to you.
We're here with Chief Langley from the Yuchi tribe on the Savannah River. Chief, talk to us about the male warrior. What is the purpose of the male warrior, and how could he be utilized, and how could he be a force to reckon with in America today?
Learn his history. Learn the knowledge of self. Whether he be African or whether he be Indian. Learn who you are. And respect your ancestors by knowing who they were, because the name that you carried them. They're in your DNA. They're in your blood. This is a spiritual journey. They're ancestors of mine. I never met one day in my life, but I saw them transform themselves in the form of a ghostly image, in the spirit to me. This is a spiritual walk.
Hello?
Yes, caller, you had a question?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
Okay, my question is, I actually have two questions. The first question is that, is the chief aware of the particular tribes that were in Robeson County during the 1750 census? Which particular tribes, if he's aware, in North Carolina during the 1750 census there?
People who are listening online, people who are calling in to Skype listening online, could you cut down your noise in the background, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Hold on.
Chief, did you get that question?
There are several tribes that were along the border. The Catawba is one that was on both sides of the water. The Shura is another one. The Wakamas, the Shakoras. There are many different tribes. I can send you the book that was written in the after the Yamasee War. I give you an example. Let's take the Tuscarora. The Tuscarora is in in North Carolina. But a lot of folks don't know, when you go search the ancient records, the Tuscarora is listed in Beaufort, South Carolina. So you have a lot of migration of tribes due to Native American slavery and due to the planters and very other colonial people coming in, pushing the tribes north or pushing the tribes south. But I do have access to that information, and I can send that information to you. I know I'm familiar more with tribes in South Carolina or Low Country, because I tend to stick within the rim of my area when it comes to identifying tribes. But I do have that information for you.
Okay. I think you're my friend on Facebook. You can send it right there to me.
Carter, you had another question?
Okay, my other question was when searching, is it a common pattern for, I believe it is, though, a common pattern for indigenous people or natives to be identified first as Indian, and then later on in the census it progressed to colored, and then black, and so on. Is that the case?
Yes.
Thank you.
Caller,
Then I know I'm on the right track.
Let me tell you something.
Uh-huh.
Many people will say, don't use the word Indian, don't use the word Negro. I'm going to tell you what. When it comes to the law, and it comes to reparations, when it comes to a land claim, you need to identify with those names, because that is history. And what is written in the history books is what's going to identify who your people are.
Absolutely. I understood.
What you don't want to do, you do not want to lose your chain connection to the identity of what your ancestors were reclassified as, because you are an extension of them today. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm speaking from a legal perspective. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Caller, thanks for your call. Chief Langley, could you give us your contact information, your email address, or whatever you want the listeners to have?
They can do heritage, HERITAGE, at SRDEUCHEE tribe.org.
Okay, listeners, you have any other thing, all the document to you with no problem. Area code 205. Could you have a question for the chief?
Actually, I do. Good evening, Chief Langley and Carrie. I appreciate the information that you are providing this evening. What I would like to know is, what difference does it really make if we are African, if we are Indian, if we are Negro? And you probably covered all of this, but before you go, I just want you to give that to us just one more time. What difference really does it make what we are classified as? Thank you, and I'm going to mute my phone and listen.
I'm going to answer that question.
Oh, it looks like we've lost the chief. He's coming back right now. Sorry about that, Chief.
Are we still on the air?
You were still on the air. Sorry about that.
I'm going to answer that question from my own life and experience. That is, I'm a Yuchi Indian. I'm a member of the Yuchi Indian tribe. I reside on my Aboriginal land. I have an Aboriginal land claim because I'm an indigenous descendant of Yuchi Indian. A African is not, unless he is part Yuchi. If you don't have a land claim, if you're not tied to a tribe, then do not claim your Indianness. Embrace your Africanness. But do not walk in a Native American meeting claiming you are Native American wearing a daisheki. So it's a choice. Totally up to you. I am a Yuchi American Indian. That is who I am. That's what I live. That's what I breathe. That's what my ancestors are. And my family has taken it to the point of taking it legally that we have had our ancestors that are past legally changed back to who they are. So their deaths and their birth certificates have been amended. Some of them have been amended without having an amended code on it.
Chief, what is an amended code?
When you modify a death certificate or birth certificate, and they put amended on it. They said it was changed and it was authorized to be changed, or it could be changed without having any amendment on it. It all cares on how you want to embrace your ancestors. I paid tribute to mine. That's who they are. That's who they were. And that's who I legally had it changed to. We were able to do that by knowing who we are. That's who we always have been. When my mother died in my house, the first thing the coroner asked me, what tribe is she from?
Any other callers on hold, or do you have any questions for the chief?
Hey, could I add on to that?
Yes, sir, Rick.
Yeah, to add on to what he was saying to the lady, here's another thing. If you can't trace your ancestry back to Africa, and they send you back to Africa, where you gonna go? I mean, you should have, if you can't trace your ancestry back there, you shouldn't even be thinking about that. And a question that I have for the chief is, there's a lot of people out there, that are trying to find their ancestry and all these things and look at all these so-called treaties and all these things. Are there any, code words in these treaties that would, let us know, or in these documents that let us know that they're exactly talking about us? Hello?
Chief,
Hello?
did you get that? Chief, did you get that question?
What was the question?
Rick, can you ask it again?
Oh, I was saying, a lot of the people out there listening, they're trying to, trying to find their heritage, and they're trying to look into all these treaties, and they probably get mixed up with a lot of the things that they're looking for. Are there any code words or things that we should be looking for in these particular documents that would let us know that they're definitely talking about us?
Let me say this. Those of us that didn't migrate to Oklahoma or any other place out west, there were treaties that were signed prior. And according to your state, those treaties may still be in effect. According to your state's constitution. Some states are still aligned with constitutions during the British era. It all depends. Some folks in Oklahoma would say that don't apply. They are in Oklahoma.
The information you give is so simple, so direct, so to the point. Why does it seem like this is so hard for us to understand and get?
Because it has never been taught. And when you go on a genealogy search, no one thinks to look at colonial law and look at racial classification because they never knew it existed. I am a forensic genealogist. I teach this. I have been studying it for over 10 years. It is very effective, very easy, along with navigation of maps. Here's an example. If your ancestors shows up on the census in 1850, that tells you right now your ancestors wasn't enslaved. Secondly, if they show up on 1850 in the census as a farmer, go look at the congressional records and to see what did they allow the Indians to do. What trade were the Indians involved with at that time? They were farmers. If you find any documentation with your family name on it, past 1850, they were not a slave. Don't let nobody fool you for that one. They are indigent servants. That means there were Africans that came over. But the majority of the Africans that came to South Carolina were free. Remember, Virginia expelled 60,000 free Africans around 1690. 60,000 people. What does that tell you?
So, Chief,
people, go ahead. People need to study the congressional records. Get out of these history books.
Chief, why do you say get out of the history books? Because that's where a lot of us, that's where we like to claim that we brag on what we read out of these books. Why are the books so unimportant, and why haven't they really helped us?
Because they're biasly written, and they omit history. Omitting history is worse than telling a lie. You left it out, so it didn't exist. So I can't find it. I'm sorry. I've had so many white people get upset with me. We were never slaves. The hell you wasn't. You better check South Carolina colonial records. The British sent 75,000 of y'all over here who were Scottish and Irish. It's in the congressional records. Oh, they were indentured service and not slaves. You're right.
What's the difference?
How come when you go back, everybody that's on this call right now, go to the census site and look up the census of 1790, and the 1790 census will tell you they did not take names in the 1790 census. It tells you the first question it asks, how many free white men in the household? Why are you going to say free if nobody wasn't enslaved? How many free white women in the household? Why are you going to say free if somebody wasn't enslaved? How many free persons? Now you're talking about the natives.
So basically, what you're saying is not what is written, but it's like you said, what's omitted.
It is what's omitted. Go look at the census, study the census history of 1790.
Chief,
They did not record any names. If you want to find your family, listen to me carefully. If you want to find your family beyond 1790, you have to search land deeds, land boundary grants, land warrants. You will find your people. They're there, owning land.
So it's not as far fetched it's not as far fetched, because I think a lot of us, that's why we go straight to Africa, because I know my grandmother and grandfather never Africa, they would look at you like you was crazy. So doing what you just said, that would show a lot of us that that isn't the case.
If they go to our website, www.srbuttribe.org, and if they take the time while they're on the phone listening right now and go to that website, and when you get to that website, scroll down till you get to the United States Census number 44 that says from 1850 to 1930, select that. When you select that, there's an icon that says 1850. Click on the 1850 icon. 1860 census is going to come up. Scroll down to the bottom, there's 1790. Click on 1790. 1790 says this is the history of the United States Census. In 1790, Assistant Marshal listed the name in 1790, the Assistant Marshal listed the name of each head of household, asked the following question. Question 1, the number of free white male age, under 16 or 16 and upward. The next question, number of free white females. The other question, the number of other free persons. The last question, the number of slaves. Europeans were slaves in this country, especially in South Carolina. And not all of these African Americans were slaves. They were slave owners. Read the book, The Black Slave Masters of South Carolina Low Country.
Rick, did you have a question?
No, not right now.
People have been confused. They have been lied to. History have been omitted. And what it does, it plays with the psychological impact, which also has an effect on your economic and social status. If you think your family has never done nothing, you ain't gonna do nothing, and you live under a cloud. There is no cloud for me. It is beyond the sky, infinite. They did not lie when some of the African and kings and queens came over here, but it was a handful of them who were slave owners.
So you're saying the African queens and kings that came over here, they were owning some of the indigenous Indians over here?
Exactly. It's a fact. It's written in the congressional records.
So Chief, how many would the congressional records tell you how many Africans did come over here as slaves?
I tell you what, if you go to the Moral Sultry Act of South Carolina, it tells you the 7 African nations that engaged in the slave trade. Many of them were living in what is now known as Edgefield, South Carolina. And in Edgefield, South Carolina, in the 1700s, it talks about the Egyptians. The Egyptians were coded as free Moors. Matter of fact, I'm going to send it to you right now, and you read it off to the people.
Economics in our communities are in bad shape, and we produce nothing in this country. All we do is consume. And some of the information he's given, it will connect us back to the land. It'll probably connect you back to some of the industries that your people were on previously. And this is definitely what needed, especially for the young people. Chief, where are you sending that email? I mean, that link.
Actually, I'm giving it to you. See, can you get a couple of calls? Give me about 2 minutes to locate this one.
Okay. People waiting on the line who are listening, do you have any questions for the chief?
I do have a question.
Please, go ahead. Where are you calling from? What's your name and where you calling from?
My name is Coco. I'm calling from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I have a two-part question. My first question is, I heard him mention that I can go to the archives building to research my history, but being in Louisiana, if you have any knowledge, where can I go to find out exactly more about my history? I do know that for a fact that I have Indian in my blood, and as well as Creole in my blood, just by seeing past family members and stuff like that. And my second part of my question is, I am a natural hairstylist, and behind the chair, I try to talk to my stylist a lot about, culture and, learning about themselves and, just getting to know their history and stuff like that. So I'm just asking a general question, what is it that I can do now as I'm learning more to be able to speak to my clients and to my people, just give me any type of information, empowerment on, how to go about reaching my people a little bit better than what I have been.
Once you find the information in the state archives go look up the colonial laws of Louisiana. Once you find those laws, start looking into statute laws and race classification laws. Once you have that information, point them to a source. The worst thing you could do is have somebody tell you about something but can't give you an affirmed source where they got it from. So authors are always biased. Somebody always, I don't like the way this guy writes. But if you go to the congressional records and get the information where the author gets the information from, you have given them the source.
Caller, you had a two-part question, right?
Yeah, the second part was, I think he kind of basically hit both questions. Once I go to the state archives and look up the statute laws and race certification, that'll give me a little bit better insight on how I can go about continue doing what I do as a natural hairstylist and trying to reach my people, talking to them. So if I'm not mistaken, I think you did answer the question, unless you have something else you would like to add to it.
We have Heritage Club meetings, and we have them on Tuesday night and sometimes Saturday mornings. And what we do, we teach the history. We also provide assistance with tracing your ancestry. You come to a couple of meetings, join, you will have access to genealogists, tribal genealogists. You will have access to forensics genealogists. You will have access to historians, anthropologists, archaeologists. We have all of them that align with us, that will help you. It's not going to cost you $200. It's not going to cost you $100. We charge $25 a year for our membership. We will help you.
And ladies and gentlemen, let me add, I've been the chief called me up from a show last week, and the information he has given me in the last week is more than I've learned in my 12 years of going to kindergarten up to the 12th grade. The information is easy to read, it's easy to find. He will walk you through it, and after reading a tenth of what he sent you, you will be looking at yourself in a whole different way. So please contact them. Chief, can you give your email and information again? Now, is this what you want me to read? The black slave holders, free blacks?
What does the title say?
Black slave holders, free black slave masters in South Carolina, 1790 to 1860.
Exactly. Before that, there's another one I put, says the petition of the free Moors of South Carolina. Open
Yes,
that
sir.
document up. That is a congressional record. Read what it says.
You want me to read the highlighted area?
Once you open the document up, it says South Carolina State Records, the State Records of South Carolina, Journals of the House of Representatives. This is where they need to go in their particular state to get this information.
Oh, okay. Oh, the State Records of South Carolina. So what do you want me to read?
Scroll down where it says 20 January 1790, page 363.
By order of the House, Jacob Reed, Speaker, ordered that the message be sent to the Senate, and that Mr. Hugh Rutledge and Mr. Dees do carry the same. The House proceeded to the second reading of a bill to incorporate the Baptist Church on Horns Creek in Edgefield County, state of South Carolina, when a motion was made and seconded that the bill be changed into an ordinance, which was agreed to. The ordinance then read through and agreed to. Ordered that the ordinance be sent to the Senate, and that Mr. Simpkins and Colonel Anderson do carry the same. And then the House adjourned till tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock.
Scroll down. You see the blue section where it says a petition? Read that.
A petition was presented to the House from sundry free Moors, subjects of the Emperor of Morocco, and residents in this state, praying that in case they should commit any fault amenable to be brought to justice, that they as subjects to a prince in alliance with the United States of America may be tried under the same laws as the citizens of the state would be liable to be tried, and not under the Negro Act, which was received and read.
There you go. Now, go down a little bit further where it says Clarinda.
Clarinda humbly sheweth that your petitioners some year past had the misfortune, while fighting in the defense of their country, to be captured with their wives and made prisoners of war by one of the kings of Africa, that a certain Captain Clark had them delivered to him on a promise that they should be redeemed by the Emperor of Morocco's ambassador then residing in England, in order to have them returned to their own country. Instead of which he brought them to this state and sold them for slaves. Since that period they have by the greatest industry been enabled to purchase their freedom from their respective masters, and now prayeth your honorable House that as freeborn subjects of a prince now in alliance with these United States, that they be not considered as subjects of this state now in force, called the Negro Law. So they don't want to be subject to the Negro Law. But if they should unfortunately be guilty of any crime or misdemeanor against the laws of the land, that they may have a just trial by a lawful jury, and your petitioner as in duty bound with every prey. Ordered that they be referred to a committee. The following gentlemen were accordingly appointed: Mr. Justice Grimke, General Pinckney, and Edward Rutledge.
There you go.
So they okay, that just separates the two right there.
They gave them a status of white. This is common not only in South Carolina, it's common throughout the South. So your relatives may be classified as white, but they're not if you descend from some of these Africans that they call free Moors. This is the only law that these Moors run around here talk about, the Sundry Act of 1790, and you see this law was implemented in South Carolina.
So when they call them the sundry free Moors, what does that mean?
They're not slaves.
So the brothers that are walking around and calling themselves Moors, this is who they are then.
That's what they want to claim they are, but you see those Moors descend from Morocco.
Right. So they are not indigenous to here, because a lot of them, they call themselves the Washita Moors, the blah blah blee Moors. So they really not are indigenous. They're just trying to what?
Well, you see what it just says, right?
Right.
Now I'm going to send you something else to prove blacks were slave owners. Read this document that I just put in your Facebook. Another one from the archives. Read this petition.
Petition details?
Yeah, read that.
And people are listening. If you're on Facebook, you can documents and I'll send them right to you. This is petition details. South Carolina, Charleston. You want me to start where? At the abstract?
Salutation.
To the Honorable William James, Waddy Thompson, Henry William DeSar, Theodore Galliard, and Thomas Waddles, Judge of the Court of Equity in the state, James Dobin. Filing date, January 25th, 1814. Ending date, January 25th, 1814.
Abstract. Go ahead.
Samuel Holman, a free man of color, asks that Anthony Chenette, his attorney and agent, account for the action while Holman was in Africa. Holman states that Chenette charged him $8,236 for sundry supplies of the domestic kind in 1805, having no suspicion then that the sum was incorrect and unjust. He executed the said Chenette a mortgage of 42 Negroes. In the fall of 1805, Holman entered into agreement with Frederick Tavel for a joint voyage to the coast of Africa, with Tavel advancing the necessary funds for the trip. To secure his debt to Tavel, Holman executed a simple indemnity bond for $12,000 that was secured by the same 42 Negroes already mentioned as having been mortgaged to Anthony Chenette. Prior to his voyage, Holman appointed Chenette his agent to transact his business during his absence. Charging that Chenette illegally seized and sold certain slaves, Holman avers that he has applied. Holman avers that he has applied to the said Anthony as his agent to make out a full and fair statement of all his transactions as his attorney during his absence. But the said Chenette hath hereto wholly refused and keeps your orator totally ignorant of the state of his property and funds in his hands. He therefore prays that Chenette be ordered to answer his charges and that he be decreed to deliver up to him the bond and mortgage. Holman also prays that the defendants not be allowed to molest, seize, carry away, sell, or otherwise dispose of any of the Negroes mentioned. He said bond and answer his charges that he be decreed to deliver up the. Well, that was the end of it. Holman also prays that the defendants not be allowed to molest, seize, carry away, sell, or otherwise dispose of any of the Negroes mentioned in said bond and mortgage. Result, partially granted.
Now, does this look like all Negroes, all Africans in South Carolina were enslaved?
Sure don't.
Many of these African Americans who choose to be African Americans, your African ancestors were slave owners in South Carolina. This is just one case. After the Civil War, laws were created called Jim Crow that stripped people of their property. Therefore, making the offspring think they never owned anything. That is the reason for Sherman going through the South, burning everything. Then they're going to reconstruct. Because the majority of the slave owners in the South, especially South Carolina, were not white. They were free Africans. And they wasn't the mulatto type. They were the black Sambo Africans that come from Africa.
So, Chief.
Slavery had nothing to do with color in the beginning. It dealt with capitalism. Jim Crow made it about color. That's why it was a rush to hang Negroes after slavery. Jim Crow years, they were hanging by the payload. Because probably some of them free Africans were giving them poor Irish and Scottish hell, excuse my word, in slavery, and it was revenge time.
Ooh.
You know, like he's saying it, go read the history of the congressional records. And as a Native American and an American Indian, I'm going to tell it on the black Africans just like I'm going to tell it on the white Irish and the German. You came here among my people.
Wow. So Chief.
Yes.
So basically, what you saying, the story roots, that was fabricated, more to bring more confusion into the table, right?
Let me tell you what I had an ignorant brother said to me. Listen to me carefully, and audience, listen very carefully. This shows the ignorance in things. The brother said to me he was related to Jane Pittman. I said to him, Jane Pittman's story is fiction. She never existed. How are you related to Miss Jane Pittman? And that's a fictional character. How do your roots tie to her? She never existed.
I thought she did. Wow. Area code 205. You had a question for the Chief?
No, I didn't have a question. I got knocked offline, so I wanted to call in so that I can continue to listen.
Okay. Chief, in these last few minutes,
yes,
tell the audience again how they can contact you and give us some closing thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, Chief is going to be with us for the next 10 weeks on Thursdays. For any questions you may have, any questions any of your relatives may have, when you go back and study what the information that he shared, and it's right in our face. And Chief, I want to thank you for sharing this with us. Give your address, give your information once again, and please leave us with some closing thoughts that we can take through the weekend and the rest of the week until you're back with us again.
On behalf of my family and my living spiritual ancestors that are still here, death is only a transition. Your ancestors, your mother, your father, your brother, your grandfather, or grandmother, uncle, or aunt, if you have consciousness to listen, their spirit lives and still here and communicate with you. That is one of the talents and ways of the indigenous people. I share this information because I know what it meant to me. And if I share with others, then they can have and know. This is nothing to charge for. Information is free. I'm just passing the word. Because I don't want you to be ignorant, and I want you to know. Because there's no greater feeling of knowing where you truly come from. I get tickled in my sleep at night that I can name 12 generations of ancestors. Knowing who you are